Yeah.
Friends, it's great to hear the buzz of conversation, and we hope that there will be plenty of time for you to talk throughout the day, but if you could take your seats, we're just about to begin. Do feel free to bring tea and coffee with you, and indeed to nip out to get tea and coffee throughout the day. Okay, well, welcome to the Library of Mistakes. It's going to be introduced as a wonderful title, I'm sure you agree, and David Clarke, who runs the Library of Mistakes, will introduce it a little bit in a minute as part of our sort of introductions. So I'm Simon Barrow. I'm a writer and researcher, and until fairly recently, director for a number of years of Ecclesia, which is a think tank that looks at the relationship between politics, economics, ethics, and beliefs of different kinds. And I'm one of the co-organisers of this, along with Professor Robbie Mockery from Heriot-Watt University. And we also have to thank the Centre for Theology and Public Issues and Edinburgh Futures Institute, and a number of other people who've come together to bring this seminar into being. This is, of course, the second in a series of seminars. You'll hear a little bit more about the first, if you weren't there, in a moment. And our focus today, I was going to say this morning, it is this morning, but throughout the day, is going to be actually renewing action on community finance. Just a couple of notices before we start. The first thing to say is that if the fire alarm goes off, it isn't a test, it's a real fire alarm, and the exit is exactly where you came in from there, so we'd all head there. The other thing to say is that the sessions before lunch are all being recorded and indeed live streamed at the moment, and they'll be available online through the Library of Mistakes afterwards. Just again to remind you of what's going to happen today, we're going to hear from David in a minute, as I said. Then we're going to hear from Professor Rachel Muirs, who was very involved in the first session. She's the Chair of Divinity at Edinburgh University. And then Robbie and I are going to have a conversation on the Edinburgh Finance Declaration and community finance. At the previous session, Robbie gave a really very stimulating talk situating this in the wider economic picture and the uncertainty we face at the moment. This time we're going to handle it a little bit differently. So if you were here last time, you will get you'll get a slightly different perspective on some of those issues. Then we're going to have a comfort break, and then we're having what's going to be a great roundtable on Scotland's credit union sector, challenges and opportunities. And we'll introduce the speakers who are part of that when we come to it. Then we will have lunch, which will arrive and be served at the table at the back there. You're all welcome to that. There'll also be stalls set up so that you can see and talk to some of the people from credit unions. And then we'll move into two sessions. The first will be looking at a prospectus for transformed community finance, where we'll be bringing some of ideas together, but also having several kind of thoughts for the day, really, from people involved practically in the sector. And then we'll look at what sort of commitments and where we might go from here at the end of the day and finish no later than 4:15, we hope a little bit earlier. So I think that's all the comments I need to make at the beginning. Is that right, Robbie? That's good. I've got the nod from Robbie. So I'm just going to hand over to David Clarke, who's going to tell us something about the splendid place we're in right now.
Thanks very much. I've mic'd myself up.
Mic'd up.
First up, I should say, I don't run this library. It's part of a team. I run the charity that looks after this library, and it's one of a number of ventures that we do. We have a library. We run courses in finance. We're very interested in making sure that the finance community and industry is responsive and works for the community, and that's one of the reasons why you're all here today, and you're all very welcome here. We have a project that encourages young girls, young schoolgirls, to go into jobs into financial markets, and we also have another project that's coming here today, Leavers Money Skills, that encourages students, young school students, to learn about finances and learn about the pitfalls and the opportunities of finance. But just very quickly, just to say what we're about here, I was speaking to the librarian yesterday, and we were talking about the library is more than just a place with books. I mean, it's very important that we have a place here, and we try to be a centre for the finance community, and we try and be a locus and a place where we can all come together. And the finance community, you know, when people think of the finance community, they think of, you know, generally kind of films like Wall Street, and you know, we just had a film on Nick Leeson and Barians, and it's a very negative view of the finance sector and the finance industry. But we believe the finance industry is a utility and it can be there for good. So we try and help, whether it's people, professionals at the front end, whether it's school children. We've supported academic projects as well. But it's very much that idea that finance can do good. And particularly from a Scottish perspective, our members of our company are the Scottish fund management community. And it shows very much that there is a way of managing money in Scotland, a way of doing finance in Scotland that I like to think it considers the long term, considers how it can help society and all those good things. So look, you're all very welcome. I think there's one more thing I want to say. If you want to get out, you see the red button there. This is very important if there's a fire. You wave your hand in front of it, it'll go green and you push the door. But if the alarm goes off, I think it opens anyway. But anyway, I hope that's everything. And look, you're all very welcome, and please sign up. It's free to use, open to all. You can come in and read in here, and the more the merrier, and it's great to have new faces. So thank you very much for coming along.
Thanks, David. One thing I did want to ask you is that a number of people have asked, who came up with the Library of Mistakes as the title?
Well, yeah, see, that's the thing. It's the elephant not in the room is Russell Napier, who founded the Library of Mistakes. And as he said, if you'd called it the Library of Financial History, no one would have come. So with the Library of Mistakes, it actually it's pretty good branding. And Russell tells me that he used to read Campaign magazine when he was a teenager, which is the advertising industry. So obviously beneath his finance head, there's a advertising guru waiting to get out. So that's the secret of the Library of Mistakes.
Lovely. Thanks very much indeed. Now, before we hear from Rachel, I thought it would be useful for us to do just a very quick round of introductions, just very quickly to say who you are and where you're from so that you get an idea, and that will help also when people want to network throughout the day. So because we want to make sure that everyone can hear, the acoustics here aren't well adapted to everybody. I'm going to pass the microphone around. So let's do that. And as I say, just quickly, who you are and where you're from.
Morning, Reverend Ian May, founder of the Castle Community Bank.
Hi, morning everyone. My name is Rob Carmichael. I'm from Castle Community Bank.
Chris Cook, too many hats to mention them all, but International Resilience Network is the new one.
I've learned something already. There you are.
Brian Quinley, similar, many hats, but primarily Scottish Enterprise and the Wellbeing Economy Alliance.
Graham Burnside. I'm with the Global Ethical Finance Initiative and its sister organisation, the Islamic Finance Council UK.
Thank you. Hello, Jake Hatch. I'm with the Association of British Credit Unions.
Hi, I'm David Bradford. I'm from the Chartered Banker Institute Scottish Members Network Committee.
Hi, I'm Sophia Duggan, Kingdom Community Bank.
I'm Kenny Murphy, and I'm from Kingdom Community Bank in Fife as well.
Norman Crawford, volunteer at Dalmuir Credit Union and a student of credit union statistics going back a long time.
Hello, Alicia Mendonça Richards from the University of Edinburgh.
Good morning, my name's Gurmeet Chau from First Class Credit Union.
Morning, Jack Campbell, Dublin City University.
Hello everyone, Leslie Martin. My background's in local government, but I now wear very many hats, but my interest today is mainly in sustainability and sustainable economic growth.
Nancy McGilvery, Chair of Caledonian Credit Union and also Director of ACE Credit Union Services.
Hi, Rebecca Frost. I've come all the way from Manchester to here. Yeah, I'm new to the credit union sector, but very interested. I'm community engagement and business development manager.
Great to have you here.
Hello, I'm Mary Duffy, Juniper Trust and the Library of Mistakes.
Hello, Martin Percy. I'm a researcher and writer, academic, working in Switzerland and China.
And occasionally Aberdeen.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm Robbie Mochry. I teach at Heriot Watt, and I'm the Vice Chair of Dalmuir Credit Union.
And I should say that Robbie, of course, probably knows more people in this room than anybody else. And you will know some people and not know other people. And we hope that the spaces in the programme today will get you a chance to talk to others. But, you know, I'm going to say this for myself. What an impressive group of people we have here. Really, really looking forward to today. So with that, two people who just arrived. Beg your pardon.
Hi. Yes, I'm Katrina Scott and this is Leonie Griffin and we're founders of Leavers Money Skills.
Okay, Rachel, I'm going to hand over to you just for a few words to start us off.
Morning all. This is my worst nightmare, this. I fall off stages 3 times as big as this, so I'm going to stay on the floor. I hope that's all right. Morning, I'm Rachel Mewers. As Simon mentioned earlier, I'm the Chair of Divinity at the University of Edinburgh, which is a chair that was endowed in 1639 by somebody who made a lot of money as a moneylender, basically, and decided to spend some of it on the defence of the Good Covenant. So whether that was a mistake or not, we will find out. Anyway, the reason that I'm in this august company is that I'm one of the hats I wear is as co-director of the Centre for Theology and Public Issues, and I'm also involved with a small Royal Society of Edinburgh funded project called Thinking the Future of Money in the Humanities, which is the grant. So there's some support from the Royal Society of Edinburgh coming to this event as well. The aim of that project and the reason that I linked up with Simon and Robbie in the first place and why Alicia's involved as well is to bring conversations between academics who are thinking about different ways to do money and finance, particularly but not only from the arts and humanities and the social sciences. Those academics, together with practitioners and policymakers, to see if there is whether the academics could do anything useful to help think about alternative ways forward, basically. And the workshop that we hosted, the predecessor to this one, which it was great to meet many of you at New College, was starting to talk about some of the ideas behind this, and particularly looking at research on religion, faith, ethics as sources for alternative thinking about futures of money and finance. So what Simon asked me to do was say a little bit about that workshop and sort of link it across to this. I'm going to say first a massive apology, and it's something I'm very annoyed about, is that I'm only able to be here for this morning. And you might have noticed in the newspapers lately, there's quite a lot going on at the University of Edinburgh at the moment to do with this kind of thing. So, I'm on live stream, right? Yeah, never. I really do apologise for not being able to be a bigger part of the conversation, and I would love to connect with folks afterwards and to pick up and be involved with what comes out of this. But to backtrack, the discussions, some of the things that came out for me from the discussions in January that I think feel really important to take forward in terms of thinking about futures of money and finance. One was just the sense which Alicia's been doing a lot of research on recently of the obvious and staring us in the face need for alternative ways to think about finance. And the difficulty that there's been in breaking out of the established boxes. This was something that Robbie presented really strongly and that came out of a lot of the conversations. That on the one hand. But then on the other hand, the really positive sense that alternatives exist. And they don't just exist in theory, they exist in practice. So this was drawing on the experience of folks within credit unions and the ways in which these practical experiments in alternatives are drawing on a really wide range of resources which some other institutions' ways of thinking about economics don't necessarily see. A range of values like the value of place, the value of community, the value of connections, the value of long-term thinking, and so on and so forth. A range of traditions like what David was just talking about, specific local traditions of Scottish thinking about how to do finance and what it's for and how it relates to society, but then maybe also range of religiously and culturally shaped traditions and values and practices that can be drawn on. So there are alternatives out there, and they're not even theoretical alternatives, they're alternatives in the world. But the question is, how do these develop? How do these grow? How do these become more visible? How do these sort of cease to be the little fiddling around the edges of the big system? And those were really kind of key questions that were explored in the workshop. One of the big things that I wanted to put on the questions that came out that I wanted to put on the table, which I think maybe needs, which I hope will be worked through in some of the conversations here, was this question about community and what community is. That was one of the really interesting discussions that came out of nowhere, in the sense it wasn't something we teed up. To what extent the communities about which credit unions think and within which credit unions think are place-based, how much place matters, how much geography matters, whether we're in an age when people are finding community in places other than place, and if so, whether that's a problem or whether that's something we lean into. When we start to think about community and finance, what are the different connections and ties that bind that people have that will enable long-term thinking, will enable sustainable thinking, will enable different forms of access to finance. So that's one of the big. The thing is, if you asked a bunch of academics what is community, you'll get a range of nice papers, and there would probably be something in. But the point is, there would probably actually be something in all of them that would at some point connect to what the community finance is, what community finance work is doing. So, although I think the hope very much is that this workshop is trying to forward on practical and collective action, I'm hoping to sort of stay in touch with some of these bigger questions that are coming out, because they are questions that are very immediate, very current, making real difference to people's lives. You know, where they're finding community, or how they're connecting is it's daily work as well as ivory tower stuff, right? So hoping to stay in touch with those conversations and be able to find ways of feeding into them in the future. I think that's all I wanted to say. As I said, the sort of thing you wanted me to say. If not, sorry, tough, it's done. But it's lovely to meet you all, and I'm looking forward to what I can make it at 2 of the day. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Rachel. And just to say, from a practical point of view, the report from the last session and the report from today are going to be done together. We're looking at the possibility of creating a website so that we can share materials on that. And so in some ways we'd hope we might have a report to feed into today, but there just hasn't been quite enough time to do that, but that's the plan. So while I continue to talk, Robbie is just about to mic himself up and head up for the opening conversation. There we go, as we perilously place ourselves on the dais. There we go.
The squeaking really makes it sound even more dangerous than it actually is.
It does. Well, perhaps, being on the edge is no bad thing in the kind of conversation that we're about to have. Sorry, that's a very poor kind of segue. Well, we've already said that this is a fantastic group of people who've come together with a lot of practical skills, but also who are thinking through what community finance is and how it can be developed. So, you know, the first question I want to ask you, Robbie, is, you know, why is a conversation about community finance important in Scotland? Why now? And what difference do you think it can make?
Okay, well, thanks very much, Simon. It's great to be here. It's great to see so many people here. And by the way, just one thing, I hope that Simon has already said I know most of the people who are in the room. But I think that one of the important things is that I've been bringing people from across networks who wouldn't normally be meeting each other. And so I think that one of the important things about community finance, well, Norman Crawford has already talked about being a student of credit union statistics. And one of the things which Norman points out frequently is that if you look at community credit unions, particularly in Scotland in particular, then really over the last decade, there has been no substantial growth. If anything, there has been gentle decline. And that's looking at numbers in which we're looking, well, that's looking at numbers which are actually reported in accounts. And as an economist, I would, of course, want to correct those for inflation. So when we say that we're staying the same size, roughly speaking, that community credit unions in Scotland are staying the same size, we're actually saying they're shrinking slowly. So their impact is, if anything, fading gently. Now, at the same time, I'm aware of credit unions which are doing extremely well. We've got Castle Community Bank here. We've got Pennine Community Credit Union. We've got Hoot Credit Union. Yes, sorry. I was talking to Jake, who lives in Burnley, about Pennine Community Credit Union. So, yes. So there's lots of excellent work going on in particular places. And one of the challenges is how we actually address it. But I'm going to give you another reason why I think this is exceptionally timely. Several years ago, the Association of British Credit Unions was kind enough to send me over to a conference in the United States. It was very nice to spend a week in Florida in November, but I learned a huge amount about the way in which community development credit unions work in the United States. And I think that perhaps the best bit was where I was interviewing chief executives. One chief executive brought her entire management team along. They weren't, it wasn't enough to talk to me. She wanted me to understand the way that the credit union worked. The lesson that I got from that was they considered to be success that their members could graduate from them. They would come in with poor credit scores, unable to get any credit even from the credit union, and the credit union wouldn't just say, go away. The credit union would say, that's interesting, let's work with you. So success for them, for graduation, meant that they could borrow from other financial institutions as well. But within that, what they also managed to achieve was what is sometimes called in marketing stickiness, that the relationship had built up with members so that they could go elsewhere, but many of them would choose to stay with the credit union. And that, I think, is actually quite important, because what that emphasises, we've already heard of things about long-term. I think we've heard about that Leavers Money Skills was going to be involved here. That's about thinking about basic financial education, something which all credit unions have an authorisation to do, but which I believe they don't do fully. Last thing I'm going to say in terms of why credit unions, rather than just community finance. In Britain, credit unions have dominated community finance. There are other institutions out there, but credit unions tend to be much better. And talking to people who, I'm afraid, have recently left the US Treasury, there is no longer a Community and Economic Development Unit in the Treasury. It's been there for 30 years and it's effectively shut down overnight. One of the reasons that they said credit unions have been exceptionally successful in the United States in scooping the money which is available for a whole variety of types of community finance institution is that they're better organised, they're better at learning from each other, and they simply understand more effectively how to engage with government programmes like the Community Development Finance Initiative. So we're talking about community finance, aware that credit unions are not the only organisations which we could be talking about, but they are the ones which are easiest for us to gather together. So that's why I'm interested in it just now.
Thanks very much. I mean, do you want to say a little bit more about what, you've already begun to talk about this, but say a little bit more about community finance, what's meant by that term, what the scope and possibility of that is?
Okay, yes. So I think that, again, community, as soon as we're talking about community, we're probably normally thinking about place-based. And so many organisations which are established, for example, I'm an officer in Dalmuir Credit Union. For those of you who don't know, Dalmuir is the western part of Clydebank, a town just outside Glasgow. It has a population of 30,000. Dalmuir Credit Union has 7,000 members. It managed to achieve that level of penetration in the 1970s, especially because it had some formidable officers early on who didn't really accept, no, I don't want to join the credit union as a valid reason for not becoming a member. And who certainly didn't accept, I want to withdraw my savings as being an acceptable thing for a member to say, no, you mean you want a loan. So member education took place in a fairly direct way in those days. But I think that one of the things which, at that time, Clydebank, in the middle of the town, there's 3 Queen's Square. And I thought, number 3 Queen's Square. No, we built 3 queens, the Queen Mary, the Queen Elizabeth, and the Queen Elizabeth II. And the slipway is now the edge of the college. So we used to build ships in Clydebank. That's gone. And with that, a large part of the sense of community, a large part of the bonds which tied people together have simply vanished. Then, of course, we've got the digitisation of society. What does that mean for community? If the people that you form a community with are perhaps scattered all over the world, the physical bonds have gone. And the way that I'm thinking of that it immediately seems to me is, well, if we're thinking about an organisation, and perhaps just one thing for those of you who are not involved in credit unions to emphasise, there's a consultation going on about what's called about the common bond. There has to be an existing association between people who can join a credit union. So Live in Clydebank is an example of one. If it becomes Live in Glasgow, or as I managed to do with what's called Scottish University Community Bank, anyone who is a graduate, a student, a staff member or a former staff member of a Scottish higher education institution or college. That's huge. What is the sense of community? And in some sense, it's very easy to say, well, these are all education communities themselves. So can we think of credit union and community as being something which forms around, as I've said, credit unions have a statutory authorisation to provide their members with education. Can we think about that as something which makes credit unions distinctive in ways which are appropriate for the kinds of communities in which we're living and engaged with nowadays?
And I mean, just to pick up on that, Clydebank, some of the most challenging statistics in terms of health, education, economic deprivation, etc. What difference do you think community finance, the way that you're talking about it, can make?
Right, okay. Let me talk about loan sharks just for a moment. We don't like loan sharks, and the last ones that, if they are legal, they have tended to be regulated out of business. So you might remember 10 years ago there were adverts all over the place for Wonga. And the regulator said, hey, Wonga is part of, or the people behind Wonga have moved from country to country, setting up hit and run organisations. And when I say hit and run, this is a term we use in economics. Oh, there's an opportunity to make a profit. It'll be closed down quickly. Let's make the profit while we can. So groups like Wonga go, oh, there are people who are prepared to pay huge interest rates. Now, they don't actually tell them all the ways in which they actually make it the ways in which, as soon as you default, will make it almost impossible for you to repay it. So there is some degree, there isn't complete disclosure, it's not ethical lending. But if something happens, and again, I was involved with Scottish Universities Community Bank for many years, the shortest time from a member asking for a loan to the money being in their account was 30 minutes. That was on an occasion when someone's cooker blew up. Now, that's the sort of occasion on which the value of having something like that, a cooker. In India, money lenders are very keen to get into the business of providing people with refrigerators, because that's something that households can't survive without. So there are these very basic goods. I remember one of my marketing colleagues saying, well, credit unions should be saying, effectively, compared borrowing money to buy one of these from a credit union, you'd be paying about half as much as if you went to some of the direct credit suppliers. So could we actually have a buy one, get one free offer effectively on these, just to emphasize the scale of the savings? So there are interesting questions, I think, which come out of, what we're saying is that credit is something that people want access to. The services which they're being provided by credit suppliers are often absolutely essential to how they live their lives. And therefore, there are opportunities for that to be exploited. Now, what credit unions are saying, and this is very much, I think, associated with place-based finance as well, that there are ways, and the idea of stickiness, which I've mentioned, we can actually keep some of the money within the community. We can keep the money within the community, and we can provide you with a better service at the time, a service that you can trust because it's being provided by possibly even your friends and neighbours. So that is something which I think is important about the nature of community within finance.
Thanks, Robbie. Thinking a little bit more about credit unions, I mean, we have practitioners here, and they will have a particular way of approaching things. Credit unions approach things in different ways. Do you want to say a little bit more about how you see the credit union sector in Scotland at the moment, and what you think the opportunities are? Where is there a need for development?
Sure.
How could things change, and in what way?
Right, absolutely. Now, I'm aware as I'm doing this that some of the things that Jake Hatch is going to be talking about, he's at the Association of British Credit Unions, and so he's got a whole lot more knowledge about this than certainly I do. But what I would say, I will just very briefly, I've mentioned common bonds, so let me just emphasize that there are essentially three different types of common bond. I've talked about community, where people live. There are also employment common bonds. And so we've got people from representatives from First Class Credit Union here today. And so that is something which is available to people originally for people who worked in the post office and telecoms. But it becomes an employment benefit, an important employment benefit if we are able to use that. And again, that is how Scottish University Community Bank started off. It was going to be the credit union for the staff of Heriot Watt. But then there was the decision to switch from an employment common bond to what's called an associational common bond. And that is to say, where there is some kind of linkage, neither community nor work, but there is some kind of linkage, and in this case it's participation in education. So there are these different types of credit unions. And I've mentioned that community credit unions haven't been growing effectively. I don't want to go into the reasons for that. But what I think we can say is that many of them have reached a size where they could do with that, where really I feel in order to develop further, they probably need more assistance. I was involved in a call recently with the Prudential Regulation Authority. And towards the end of the call, they were asking if there were any questions. I said, well, I think this question is going to be of absolutely no interest to anyone except myself, so my apologies to everyone else who's on the call. But essentially what I wanted to ask is, if a credit union set out with a strategy of intentional growth, how might you be able to support it? And the phrase which jumped out of the reply for me is, we would support holistic growth. And for me, what does that holistic part mean? Well, of course, the obvious thing is, what does growth mean? The credit union is going to double its loan book. The credit union is going to double its savings, its members' savings over, the way that my entrepreneurship colleagues would talk about that would be high growth means 25% growth per year, which means that the organisation doubles in size every 3 years. Over a 10-year period, the organisation could be 10 times the size it is now. So that would be transformative for the organisation. How do we think about that growth that we've got? If you want to achieve that kind of growth, it's got to be intentional. There's got to be a strategy and a purpose to it. How do we achieve that? And I think that this idea of holistic growth, it was extremely helpful for me, because what that's saying is, don't just concentrate on the numbers, but think about all the other things which are going to have to go in place. Are you going to have directors who are able to scrutinise a business plan and challenge the staff as they're putting the plan into place? Are you going to have, because this is probably going to be necessary, the range of skills which are going to be required to bring into place, bring new services into the credit union? New ways of thinking about, for example, where you engage with members, how you engage with members. Remembering what I've talked about, and stickiness is a word which I will probably come back to quite a lot. How do you actually encourage members to use more services from the credit union and to use them over a longer time? We know, for example, almost every credit union manager will be able to tell you that the ideal customer is aged between 35 and 50 and is female. Why? Well, apart from anything else, gentlemen, women are more likely to repay loans. So that makes female customers, or female members, particularly attractive. 35 to 50, they tend to be at the stage where they're in that part of the life cycle where they need regular credit. So what you've got is year after year of a member coming back and asking to borrow more money. That generates the income and the relationship and the income, which is good for the credit union. So within all of this, the question is, yes, we're doing this and we're able to do repeat business with our existing members. How do we attract new members? How do we manage to encourage members to do more with the credit union? How does the credit union have to change? And one of the reasons why I've tried to bring in people who don't have any engagement with credit unions at present is because that will hopefully allow new conversations and start to thinking about new ways of support, so that holistic growth means credit unions operating within a supportive environment. That is, by the way, something which I think, for all sorts of reasons, I definitely don't have time to go into the answer for this because I talked for far too long, but this is one of the reasons why I think we have much to learn from what's done in the United States, where there are all sorts of organizations, rather like Didasco, or Leavers Money Trust, or Leavers Money Skills, which can provide support to credit unions in a variety of ways.
Okay, thanks. Before we move on, is there something very brief you want to say about the regulatory environment as well?
Yes, I think that this is actually quite important, that credit unions are cooperative societies, and the Cooperatives and Community Benefits Act allows most cooperatives to use a much wider variety of financial instruments in order to raise external capital. It is perhaps my cold-hearted economist or cold-eye economist view at it, that this seems to me to be something which has actually been a substantial barrier to the kind of, would be a substantial barrier to the kind of change I would like to see in the community finance sector. There has to be a better understanding of external finance. That doesn't just mean the regulator. This will either require, this is probably going to require legislative change, but the good news is that the government in Westminster has essentially asked its civil servants to find a solution, I think, to this, and certainly to think about how they can support community finance to expand.
Thanks, Robbie. Moving on, these two sessions and really our work together came out of talking about the Edinburgh Finance Declaration. And some here will know a little bit about that, others a little less so. Can you say what the declaration is and how you think a declaration that kind can kind of strengthen thinking about credit unions and community finance in a practical way, and who can it help to bring on board as well?
Right, yes, indeed. I mean, I think that this is where we perhaps start to get into some very interesting work. Now, I'm aware that Graham Burnside is here, and Graham, as part of the Global Ethical Finance Initiative, was involved in the crafting, whereas I was just showing up and contributed. I showed up and then I contributed to a couple of workshops. But the Finance Declaration is interesting, I think, in two ways in particular. The first way is that it is a statement of 6 ethical principles. It comes from faith traditions, and I think that they could be summarized very briefly as act justly and love your neighbor as yourself. Which are difficult things these are difficult dicta for financial organizations. Think about every financial contract, every loan contract a credit union signs is, we're going to give you money in the expectation that you will repay us. It requires trust. It requires confidence. And ultimately, and here one of my favorite biblical sayings is, be wise as serpents and gentle as doves. So that puts credit unions, as soon as you start talking about the theological underpinnings of finance, suddenly you realize that we're asking people that there is something there which challenges the conventional assumptions. And community finance is, I think, in a very good place to do this. Now, a friend of mine doing a completely different piece of work, this has nothing to do with community finance, but talks about what he calls a 30-30-40 society. This is to do with health outcomes. If you're in Scotland, if you live in the poorest 40% of the population, so that means that you've got income of up to about £25,000 a year at the moment. If you live in that group, then you're a man, I'll talk about. Women have the numbers are slightly different for women, not quite so depressing. But if you're a man, you have probably something less than 50 years of healthy life expectancy. If you live in the top 30%, it's around about 70. If you're in the bottom 40%, you're probably going to have nearly 20 years of bad health. And when we're talking about bad health, we're actually saying in some sense your life is limited. Now, many people in this group are doing jobs which are physically so demanding. I remember many years ago hearing John Beattie, the broadcaster and former rugby international, who I don't think he's got his own hip and knee joints because of all the pressure he put. But he is one of the few, he was also an accountant before he became a broadcaster, he is one of the few relatively wealthy people who have actually gone through the sort of physical pain that many of these people with very ordinary working lives have. This is why in the one of many reasons why in the United States we've had the opioid epidemic. And so what we have, if we are thinking about community finance in this way, we're actually thinking about small changes which are potentially going to be transformative. We're actually thinking about how we give people access to and this is definitely coming back to the Edinburgh Finance Declaration, how we enable human flourishing through small changes. And as soon as I mention human flourishing, those of you who know this will be saying, that could be thinking about about Catholic social teaching. It could also be thinking about Aristotelian philosophy. So we're back to Greek philosophy as well, classical philosophy, and ideas of what it means to live the good life. So how do we manage to do that? Or how do we manage to use money to do that very old-fashioned thing? And I'm not going to go into classical philosophy because I enjoy it too much. I'll stop there.
Thanks very much, Robbie. we're going to take a break in a couple of minutes, and you can replenish your cups with water or tea or coffee or whatever, and then we're coming back with a panel that's going to dig into the undergrowth of some of the ideas. But perhaps the last question really is just if you have any thoughts on this issue that Rachel raised, which is the whole question of community. What kind of community supports and develops the kind of finance that we're talking about, and vice versa? What can finance contribute towards rethinking community? Because it does feel as if we're in an age of kind of dissipation and the breaking of bonds, or of the refounding of bonds in different kinds of ways. I mean, digitally,
Yep.
a lot of people connected digitally and so on. This is something we probably do want to go on and explore in much more detail, as Rachel was hinting. But is there something finally you'd like to say about that question, which strongly came up at our last session together?
It's not so much something that came up at the last session, but something that I've been reflecting on since. When we think about credit unions as communities, there are two ways that we can think about it. Each credit union itself should be a community, but there should also be a community of credit unions. Credit unions are cooperatives, and cooperatives are supposed to engage together. Now, I was talking about this with one of the staff in Edinburgh University, Toby Schneider, who's the engagement officer for FinTech and financial services at Edinburgh Futures Institute. Very grand title. Edinburgh Futures Institute is, I think, well, in some ways perhaps it's an attempt to try to answer the library of mistakes. It's thinking about how to design, how academic ideas can be used to design a better future. And so Toby, who has worked in finance for many years, with the name Schneider, you're perhaps not surprised to discover he's German, knows banking inside out, and asked, so do they have a common back office system? And for those people who've been involved with credit unions for a long time, you probably go, that's a long story, because there was an attempt to build one and it collapsed. But I think that, and what he was saying immediately was, well, if you think about something like the savings banks in Germany, they are almost all small institutions. Some of them, and I don't know the German savings bank quite so well as Rabobank, the cooperative bank, the largest bank in the Netherlands, is a network of cooperatives. If we were talking about credit unions in the United States and transplanting them to be about the same size as they in the UK, we'd be looking at a network of institutions which would be sharing services from common platforms. There would probably be some kind of common branding so that everyone would know what a credit union was. We'd be looking at an institution roughly the same size as Nationwide Building Society, which has done very well, of course, with its mutual status since 2008, when suddenly people lost trust in banks. So credit union. So when we're talking about community, I'm going to put on this second layer, almost the meta community. Sorry, that's you can tell I'm an academic. The meta community of how credit unions engage with each other so that they are able to deliver more together than they could do separately. And this is, again, thinking as an economist, this is especially important because we know that banking benefits from huge economies of scale. So that's why we only have 4 big banks in Britain, 2 in Scotland, but also from economies of scope. And what I mean by that is the more services that can be packaged together, the more profitable they will be in financial services. And particularly, it is very rare to find groups which just do organisations which just do savings and lending and have no ambition to be involved in transactional services. The reason for this is quite simple. If you're doing both together, you have a huge database of information which is extremely useful for your lending. So it means, so that is perhaps a direction in which credit unions could go. I will just finish with one last statistic to give you an idea of the size of the US credit union movement. 18% of all cars are purchased using credit union finance in the United States.
Wow. Robbie, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
That also lands us perfectly on time, which is great, which means we can have a relaxed coffee break. We'll come back in 10 minutes, and I'll call you back in 10 minutes. And then Alicia Mendonca-Richards is going to facilitate the conversation that's going to take place, and that will involve Graham Burnside, Jack Hatch, Katrina Scott and Leonie Griffin, and Ian May. And so just to say to those wonderful people, if you could just come up after a few minutes, and we'll sort out your microphone and get you situated on this not too perilous dais. Actually, it's better than it sounds. Anyway, enjoy your break, have a chat to people, and we'll see you in 10 minutes. Thank you. Dear friends, I know it probably doesn't seem like you've had 12 minutes, but you have. So could I invite you to return to your seats? Wherever you wish, Graham. If I can get our august speakers up. I can get another. Oops. It's going to be very, very warm fellowship up on this day, so I'm sorry about that. No, I'm not there. Do you want to? Are you okay at the end there? Sorry, man. That's mine. Yeah, that's mine.
Test? Yeah, that's okay. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the roundtable discussion on challenges and opportunities in Scotland's community credit union sector. So we have a really nice wide range of panellists who have experience from sort of principles of ethical finance and policy through to practical experience running community finance and community engagement as well. We'll hear initial contributions from each of our panellists, and then we'll be opening it up to questions and comments from all of you. So please do be ready to contribute. We very much want this to be an interactive session. We're going to start with Graham Burnside, who is a Senior Advisor to the Global Ethical Finance Initiative, who's going to speak about some of the ideas from the Edinburgh Finance Declaration.
Okay, well, thanks very much. I wasn't completely clear what I was going to be speaking about, so this will be highly improvised, but we'll do our best. As you said, I'm with the Global Ethical Finance Initiative, and I also chair the advisory board of the Islamic Finance Council UK, which was its sister organisation. I'm not sure whether everybody here will know very much about the Edinburgh Finance Declaration, but so would it be helpful if I just gave a very brief kind of indication of the history? So, well, it actually, it's the ideas for it began exactly 10 years ago. We at that point were looking at the relationship between faith finance and obviously particularly Islamic finance and the wider ethical finance world, and we could see that various of the faiths were beginning to grapple with these sort of questions of ethical finance, responsible investment, and so forth. But as far as we could see, there wasn't very much contact going on between them. And to the extent there was, it was really largely about what was different, what their differences were rather than what they had in common. So our idea was to try and stimulate a project whereby we would bring together, at least initially, the Islamic tradition and the Christian tradition with a view to seeing whether they could sit down together and agree a sort of framework of shared values in the area of finance and economics. And that got going. The whole process took about. I should have said we were effectively representing the Islamic side, and because of where we are here, it was the Church of Scotland which stepped up. I'm pleased to say, Ian, to represent the Christian side. The moderator at the time was very interested in it. So we started this off, and Robbie mentioned this briefly, with a series of workshops, seminars, roundtables, meetings like this. And the whole process took about 3 years, and eventually we distilled the whole thing into our final document called the Edinburgh Finance Declaration. If you look at the UKIFC website, you'll be able to find a copy of it, or just Google it, it'll take you to it. And this will show you that we came, as Robbie said, also to identify 6 values. And I won't go through all of them in detail, but the first one, and perhaps the most significant, was the idea of stewardship. In other words, that humanity shouldn't be seen as having a sort of totally unfettered right to do what it likes with the world's resources, but rather it should see itself as a trustee for future generations and indeed all life on the planet. And the other values came out of this, and I suppose I mentioned the 6th one, which is the idea of the common good. In other words, that wealth should be used for the benefit of society as a whole. So that came out in 2018. So obviously it was an end in itself to a degree, but the then question, I suppose, is what's it for? And I think we would have 2 main answers to that. The first idea was that this should help to inform what you might call broader finance culture. I mean, I think there was general agreement at the time of the financial crash that one of the main problems leading to all of this had been a total disintegration of traditional underpinning of what you might call business culture. And the general mainstream reaction to that was to have a great swathes of, as you will all know, of legislation, regulation, etc. That may or may not be about to be wound back in some parts of the world, but that was the general reaction at the time. But it seemed to us that what was needed was looking for a much broader philosophical underpinning to the ethical context within which business should be conducted, and that the faith traditions can contribute to that, as distilled in the Declaration. And secondly, and this is perhaps the most relevant part for today, we were very much hoping that it would then stimulate the idea of using the framework expressly as a basis for developing practical financial products in areas where there's a need for them, in areas of financial deprivation, financial lack, etc., etc. So that's kind of the background. I've probably talked far too much.
Thanks very much, Graham. And I'd be interested to hear from the other contributors in due course about whether the Edinburgh Finance Declaration has had any influence on the sector, if you've seen that in the work you're doing. We're next going to hear from Jake Hatch, who is Project Manager at the Association of British Credit Unions. And Jake's going to talk about developments in the sector and plans for certification as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here today. So yes, I'm Jake. I work at the Association of British Credit Unions, ABCUL. We are a trade association for credit unions. We're the largest one in the UK currently. We've got just over 60% of UK credit unions are members of ours. There are other associations. We all get on. We all have meetings. We're all friends together. We're all cooperatives. One of the advantages is that we've obviously, with 130 members, we really do see the trends. We see what's going on in credit unions deep down. We've got them spread across England, Scotland and Wales. We've got 30 members currently in Scotland. And I know Robbie's already touched, he said, talk a little bit about what credit unions are. I know Robbie's already touched on that, so I won't go into it in too much detail, but effectively, not-for-profit, financial cooperatives. That's what we do. Loans and savings, predominantly for vulnerable members, to be honest, I will say. Not exclusively, certainly, but initially when people contact credit unions, when they approach credit unions, it's those in kind of financially vulnerable positions. So just going to talk a little bit, because when we were looking at this, we were looking at kind of the challenges and opportunities that we're seeing within the sector. So I'm going to start with the opportunities, because unfortunately, the challenges you could list kind of forever with what's going on at the moment in the world. So the opportunities certainly are this new government. Look, everyone here will probably be aware that the promise, with the commitment, should I say, rather than promise, to double the mutuals and cooperative sector. We are part of that. Okay, we're a small part of it, certainly. I think we all got quite excited when we first heard that and assumed that the financial cooperatives would benefit greatly. It's not as easy as that. We've dug down a lot deeper, and it's going to take some battling, but there really is potential there for us all, and us all cooperating and getting together. And it's great to see a room like this, and I agree with Robbie and everything everyone said. Having such a mixed room full of people is so essential, because we can't do it on our own, basically, as a sector, and I think we could probably all agree that in what we do. And, you know, the more opportunities we've got is, and I'm going to use this as a challenge and an opportunity, a cost of living crisis we're in currently. So it's pretty disastrous and has been for a number of years for generally most people in the country financially. Credit unions get hit by that a lot more than most because of their demographics. And I think whilst that's really challenging, credit unions have a real opportunity, because during the pandemic, for example, we were there for members when many other financial institutions weren't. We were already set up for assisting members who were struggling financially. The first thing that I know, there's a few people from credit unions here, I know for a fact that everyone will have done this on numerous occasions. It's if somebody rings and says they're struggling to pay, it said, right, how can we help? It's not, right, here's your debt collection letter, etc. So I think we've got a real opportunity with this cost of living crisis and I think we have been doing, to stand out. There's half as many credit unions now than there were 6-7 years ago in the country, but membership has increased significantly year on year. Okay, so yes, in some ways the sector is kind of, stagnating is a horrible word, but I know, as was said before, it's kind of leveled out to a certain extent, but there still is appetite there. And the kind of consolidation of the sector is more from mergers rather than closures. There have been a few closures, sadly, but most of it is from merger activity and transfers of engagements. There's on average about 10 a year happening at the moment, credit unions merging into other credit unions. That's looking like it's accelerating, not slowing down at this point. So we're already preparing as an association for a world in which there's less than 200 credit unions in the UK. Further years down the line, I would expect it's going to be below 150 before it really settles down. I'll be interested to see what people think on that one. Just quickly, sorry, because I'm rambling, but I think we're doing a piece of work at the moment, a project which I think is really relevant to this, which is called Community Development Credit Union Project. Now, Robbie's touched on this. This was something that we effectively stole from North America and the States, because they've been doing this for many, many years, and Inclusive, based in the States, is an organisation which does exactly what it says on the tin. Therefore, credit unions that are all about financial inclusion, financial vulnerability, giving people access to credit who wouldn't normally, kind of immigrants who come through who can't open a bank account. Now, they decided to create a designation, so credit unions, most people here will know what credit unions do and who we are, and we will say that we support the financially vulnerable and we're there to help the financially vulnerable. But when somebody says, prove it, that's where we struggle. It's really difficult to do so, and we don't really have the resources and capacity to spend our time proving it because we're doing it. So what the Community Development Credit Union accreditation does is that gives us that recognition with government agencies, with local authorities, with payroll partners, with local businesses, to display, right, look, this is what we do. This accreditation which we're looking to bring in is the kite mark, effectively, to show we support our communities. We've been working with 8 pilot credit unions currently. First Alliance, based up in Scotland, of a Scottish representative in those pilot credit unions. And the initial data we've taken has been staggering, to be honest. And we've seen over the aggregated data, over 70% of the members that those credit unions are serving do fall in the lowest financially vulnerable demographics, are the ACORN data that we use. That's something that we are pushing, but also we found from this data that we're only reaching 1 in 40 people within the common bonds who make up that 70%. So the potential is huge, and it's all about capacity building for the credit unions. And I think everyone in this room can help with that, because as Robbie said before, it's not just about financial support that we're looking for. There are many, many other ways that organisations can support credit unions to reach those financially vulnerable people, because we can do this sustainably as well. Credit unions have proved for many years we can do this sustainably. We are regulated. There's a misconception that we're regulated lightly. We are regulated lighter than the banks, but very, very heavily still. We are still staying within those regulations when it comes to arrears, bad debt, etc., whilst serving the vulnerable. And we are the last place people can go to before the payday lenders, the doorstep lenders, Wongas, Amigos from the past will go to. And we need that support.
Thank you very much, Jake. Sounds like from what you're saying, there are lots of opportunities for different community finance initiatives to work together, and a lot of your strength will come from that, so hopefully today is a good opportunity to do that. We're next going to hear from Katrina Scott and Leonie Griffin of the Levers Money Skills Group, which is part of the Didasco Education Company, who are our host today. And I believe they're going to speak about working with students in the east of Scotland to develop their financial capabilities.
Hello, just to explain, we set up this charity 3 years ago, and we've got experience, Leonie and I, for over 20 years each, of going into schools and talking to young people about their money. We feel that it's incredibly important that young people manage to leave school with some knowledge before they turn 18 and go out in the world and deal with their money. So we look at various aspects, but one particularly is borrowing and savings. And we're very keen to encourage young people to understand exactly what they are borrowing and to make the right choices in life. And I think obviously that's where credit unions come in. I mean, it's interesting, we were talking on the way here, we don't hear a great deal of young people talk about credit unions. And I think it's, they just literally don't have a great deal of knowledge about it. I think it would have come through their family, and unless their family is a member of the credit union, they won't know the positive aspects of it. And I definitely think that's a message that can get out. But I think you should also realize that young people are also, there are a lot of things thrown at them. Buy now, pay later, it's massive. There are lots of very quick ways they see to borrow money, and they aren't always the correct way. So I think that's something that if a credit union can talk to young people more about it and educate them more, then that has to be positive for the future. Do you want?
I was going to say, yes, it's about really, I mean, our whole job is to create a kind of positive dialogue, because we do tend to find that, I mean, obviously they're slightly fearful. We see them in either at the point of leaving, so either 4th, 5th or 6th year, and all of them are fearful of transitioning to be an adult anyway and just going out into the world. So it's about kind of just, I suppose, creating a bit of a safe space and just saying these are the choices. And as you say, because a lot of them live in a very digital world, they're constantly exposed to various forms of instant access, to credit. So I think it's about actually sort of reining that in, and just, it's all about choice, really. It's all about kind of just, providing the information and hoping, I suppose, giving them the tools to take that information forward and hopefully make the right decision. So, anyway, thanks.
Thank you very much. Sounds like your work is a really interesting link between developing financial capabilities, but then also encouraging ethical financial choices. So it'd be really interesting to hear more about that. And our final panellist is Ian May, who is the founding chairman of Castle Community Bank and former minister of Southleigh Parish Church. And he's going to talk to us about the challenges of setting up community finance and particularly raising patient capital.
Thank you. Interesting, isn't it, today? I suppose when you think about it, you have to be quite realistic, and understand the market you're operating in. Before I was a minister, I was in banking for about 20 years, so a fair awareness of the financial institutions and lending and borrowing and all that sort of stuff. And when I came as a minister to Leith, at the time I had one of the, a lot of people, who were in the financially excluded, I would call them. Actually, I'll call it financially exploited, is probably a better expression. Anyhow, I went there and folks said to me, come on, you know about banking, let's set up a credit union. And I said, fine, but we're not going to do it like other credit unions because they don't grow, they stumble along, they struggle, they rely so much on handouts of one form or another. And they don't do what their hearts tell them they want to do, which is great, is to help those less fortunate than themselves. And that's all great. But from day one, our strategy was very much, you could call it an 80-20 or a 90-10 approach. 90% of our business must be relatively mainstream business. And if you make your money from that, then you can actually then service the 10% or the 20% in your community that needs that help, but even in the wider community. And you have to do that. And the only way you can do that is yes, you have to raise the funds. You have to raise the seed capital quite a bit. And I think one of the things, I suppose, coming from a church background, was looking at how we could raise some money. Yes, some of it through the churches, because people have got that same, if you like, ethical understanding of justice in so many areas, especially financial justice. So there's an open door. Also, in your community, there's lots of people that want to probably try and do the same. So you need a good bit of publicity and a bit of marketing to get that message out initially. And we were very fortunate. We managed, I think, coming from a marketing background in banking as well, we did quite a bit in that area, and we got quite a bit of exposure that allowed others to come to us and offer us, seed capital, and later on, some of the regulatory capital we needed to move on, because that's the two things. Yeah, when you're starting up, get it all done, get the seed capital, get the stuff. Partner with other people. I think we heard earlier Robbie talking about back office, partnering, getting partners and getting economies of scale. Well, from the very early on, even before Castle was actually formed, we were in discussions with an organisation that had a good back office, so we could just plug into it, so we don't have to worry about building all that. Yes, you pay management fees and everything else, but you're just plugging in so you can deliver out the front door what you're set up to do. Quite straightforward business practice, honestly. But you need to know, and you need the people who know about it. Because one of the things when we first started, and some of the folk that were in the initial, if you like, board, good people, great hearts, want to make a difference, but you need the experts as well. And so very early on, I brought in, colleagues from the banking industry who knew about risk profile and all the things, and regulatory capital and all these types of things that will make you grow and actually deliver what you did. And there's lots of challenges, don't get me wrong. I remember just before an AGM thinking, are we going to pass the regulatory thresholds? Have we got the liquidity? I think it was half an hour before the AGM started when I got the extra £20,000 I needed just for your regulatory capital. Because that's a big challenge on the regulations. Because as you grow and take more savings, and I don't have to tell you, you all know about this, the more regulatory capital you need. And how do you get that? And I think that's one of the biggest challenges we've all got. Getting savings in, dead easy. Just put your interest rates up and they'll come flooding in your door. Lending out, yeah, there's a big demand there. And if you get your risk profile right and you get your marketing right and you know who you're targeting, yeah, you'll get that side of the business in as well. But as you grow, it's going to be the regulatory capital that holds you back. Because that has to be money just parked, doing nothing. And because, as people said earlier about, what are credit unions, do we know about them? Big institutions that might provide that regulatory capital don't understand credit unions. Or they're too small, to actually be, if you go to a big fund manager and say, I need, 20, 30 million, they'll laugh at you and say, no, we deal in tens, hundreds of millions. So there's that gap as well, and that has to be bridged and tried to be understood how you get your regulatory capital, because that's what will hold us back. And it has held back, certainly Castle in some respects in the past, because we're always working on that. Because at the end of the day, you need the economy of scale, you have to make the money so you can then, if you like, cross-subsidise those that are being financially excluded or exploited. And you build a business, because you can't build a business on the lower end. It won't work unless you get lots and lots of money from governments and all that. And the governments have poured millions into the credit union movement over the years. Maybe a lot of it, how effective it was, is debatable, and I'm sure we all know that. So that's all I'm going to say. There's challenges out there, but they can be overcome. But you need the cooperation of, as we've heard, ABCO, the government, to look at the regulatory framework and where we can source money, and also to get ourselves out there to say that we are a viable financial institution that can be invested in. You'll get a lot of local folk to do the seed capital. That's in some ways. You know, we raised about 200,000-300,000 of seed capital initially just to get us going. And that was, I know it's a lot of money, but it was quite relatively easy because you were going to different pots. It's when you move to the next level, once you get your loan book, you know, above the 10s and 20s and 30 millions, when the big issue is regulatory capital. That's a challenge. And that's it. And we can all flourish. I love that term, flourishing. I could go into that as well if you like, Robbie, sometime. Anyway.
Thank you very much, Ian. Really fascinating to hear about how it works in practice. Do we have any comments or questions from any of you? We'll have to pass the mic around.
Dance around balletically.
Too much to say. One, just while I remember, I'm at that age, sorry, about being given more responsibility in, in my first week at Hoot, we had Andy Burnham at the office launching the annual B-Bus network loan. So I think like credit unions are being given more responsibility and functions. And then there's a whole retrofit happening in Greater Manchester. I think they're wanting the credit unions to administer that. So I think there's lots of roles for credit unions. And also yesterday I was in Govan, and the credit union there, they were doing currency for holidays. I was like, wow, I've never heard of that for a credit union. So I think the sky's the limit with what we can provide. And also I was interested in the Edinburgh Declaration. I've only been in post 12 weeks, and after researching, 19% of Bolton residents are Muslim. So I was thinking we're not really representing the community with our services. But the first halal credit union actually started in Manchester called Your Be. So it's, maybe how we link up with that. But I just found it interesting that we're not really offering all our residents in Bolton the service because we do have Muslim members, but they can't really fully access our credit union. So just been interesting to talk.
Shall we take sorry, did you want to respond to that? No. Shall we take a few more questions and comments before we hear back from the panel?
Hello, thanks for that. Leslie Martin. As a person who worked in local government, I suppose I have to ask the question of any of the panel, what more could government, at whatever level, the UK level, the Scottish level, or the local level, do to support credit unions? Thank you.
And one more.
So the question, I suppose, links into the forthcoming community wealth building legislation in Scotland. I suppose the opportunities for the number of pillars as part of community wealth building, both looking at investment, finance, but also inclusive business models and fundamentally things like community interest companies and credit unions as part of that. So what is the opportunity, or how do we kind of, I suppose, better leverage legislative change to impact some of that?
I think, shall we start with Jake?
Sure, yes. I mean, I can't believe you've made me say this word. Legislative reform is so difficult. I mean, it's a lot of what we do at ABCOL is because obviously with the number of credit unions lobbying with the government is a significant portion now. We did have some reform coming last year, so we've got a slight broadening of the products and services we can offer, so credit unions can now do higher purchases, for example, for cars, as Robbie said. I did not know about that. 18% of the car loans in the US are through credit unions. Down the line, that's something we can target, but I think it's to the point that the Castle are making there. I mean, you need significant capital. If you, as a credit union, suddenly start doing car lending, you're going to grow significantly very quickly, and at the moment, in the regulatory environment we're in, that's really, really difficult. It's really difficult to do because you do need that capital in place. I think you are right as well. From Hoot's point of view, there's a lot of exciting products out there which credit unions can do, but credit unions have to be very flexible. They have to really scrape around to find those products they can do, which kind of helps them to stand out and helps them to reach into their communities. But you are right when it comes to, so 3 million is the maximum potential common bond a credit union can have in its area. At the moment, credit unions aren't kind of supported in a way, if regulatory wise, to be able to reach all 3 million of those people. There's always parts of the community that are dropped off, and I think that's something that we definitely need to look at.
Thank you. Ian, do you want to add anything on how the government can support credit unions on that question?
I think most of it's been said. I think it really is going back to something Robbie was on about looking at cooperatives and how we finance them. You know, there is a lighter touch on credit unions and, say, in banking. But if we're to grow, we do need some, and I think you're right about changing legislation's a nightmare. It'll take forever. But I'm sure there's something more simpler stuff they can do. And I think it is. You can start at the local level with your local MPs and in Scotland, the Scottish Government and everything else. But of course, everything is reserved to Westminster. So even at a local level, a national level in Scotland, it's very difficult to change, which is really frustrating because there seems to be a willingness in Scotland to make, credit unions and do things, but their hands are tied. So there's even that aspect of devolving. And there was at one time when I remember going to a meeting, a good few years ago with the regulator office in Haymarket. I don't know if it's still there, and speaking to them, and they were very keen. But again, the purse strings and the hands are tied at Westminster. So I think devolving financial regulation, to Scotland, to Wales, and even the regions of England, perhaps. So it can then reflect the local situation, could be something to look at and to talk about, and may help. Who knows?
Thank you. Would you like
the only thing I might add is I think there is a potential role for government, whether it's Scottish government or UK government, in convening and finding mechanisms for driving forward specific problems. I was struck by what Ian was saying about the problems with finding of capitalising credit unions, and the specific problem of there being a mismatch between the size of these organisations and what the appetite is for the investment community. And it seems to me that there could be a role for government in setting up a task force, or call it what you like, but something in that direction, as to whether there's some form of vehicle could be found or some mechanism could be found whereby that mismatch could be resolved, which would have to involve in some way bringing the individual players together to form a greater whole. Whether that's possible within the numbers of credit unions we have, I don't know. But of course, that could tie into what you were saying earlier about consolidation. But it does seem to me, we and Jeffy have recently been involved in a task force the Scottish Government set up on how to promote sustainable investment within and attract it into Scotland. And it seems to me that's the kind of thing that the government can do.
For those of you who have been around in the credit union for a while, I don't know, could be 10 years ago, there was something called the Growth Fund, where 30 million was provided by the government to replace high-cost lending from, doorstep lenders and everything else, and credit unions could apply for so much of that capital to then lend out, and they were given some operational capital as well. Now that didn't need any change of legislation, didn't need anything. And so almost from a regulatory capital perspective, if a fund was set up at whatever level, whether Scottish level or UK level, of regulatory capital fund for the sake of it, that credit unions could then dip into to allow them to grow. Okay, it still sits there, so it'd be quite safe in a way. To me, that could be part of the answer for growth. And there is, and I think that is something that can be done without, any big changes. It just needs the will. And it's not to keep credit unions growing, not to subsidize them or anything. It's just to say there's a pot there, And the government do it anyway in so many other things for so many other sectors, whether if you export goods, you get the sort of guarantee scheme from the government. So they've got pots of money there. And we're not talking about, well, maybe we are talking about £1 billion. Imagine if we put £1 billion that you could dip into that. That'd make a big difference. And it would just have to sit there. It's not to be used, it just sits there as for your regulatory framework. I don't know.
Thank you.
Sorry, just a quick one on that, just to follow it up. That's something that ABCL are currently lobbying for. So we've spoken to the FCA and the PRA about that, and we had a face-to-face with Tulip Sadiq 2 days before she stood down, where there were some really positive conversations. But of course, that is one of the big issues that we have, and we've got to fight with. We've had great relationships. We're not politically affiliated. We always have great relationships with ESTs, and it looks like it was going to be very productive. So we've started the conversations again. Let's hope this one can stick around for a little bit longer. But that's something our members have actively asked us to pursue that. So as a board, that's ABCL's mission is to pursue that down the line. Yeah.
Thanks very much. I was just thinking back to what Robbie said at the beginning about small changes leading to big transformation, and whether the education sector is potentially a place where that could happen, and whether you have any thoughts about small changes that could be made in education to equip people leaving school with the ability to make the right sort of financial decisions.
Yes, I think that's something that I suppose the government can look at. At the moment, financial education does lie very loosely within Curriculum for Excellence in Scotland. And I think there is no doubt that if the younger people started learning it, and if it was put into the curriculum, then I think you would see an impact without doubt. But I would say at this point that's not something that looks like it would happen, and therefore I think it's left to charities like ours to go in and speak to young people. One thing just quickly, since you mentioned it, is when we're thinking of young people and what they're looking at, they are looking for a broad range of products now. And I think that's maybe one of the stumbling points. Interesting what you said about car finance, and actually also a lot of people, young people, for example, will take out Monzo cars simply so that they can go abroad and it's free to exchange their money. So I think that at the moment for a younger person would be a reason that they probably aren't looking at credit unions.
I was going to say, and if we turn back to Monzo again, they're also adapting very, very quickly. I mean, I know that because my daughter's not young, and well, she's 23, so she's quite young, but she has started dabbling on the stock market just because Monzo gave her the opportunity to do that, and they seem to be very good, just purely because they don't have that brand structure of adapting. So I think that you're up against that. You're also going to be kind of fighting against people with massive amounts of investment in technology.
Shall we take another 3 questions and comments from the floor?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting lot of questions and answers. I'm sort of coming at this from a meta perspective that, we are seeing this trend of 25, 30 years of basically cutting out the middleman. In our area, I know the guys who started Zopa. I remember going to their office when they did, and we just heard about Monzo, etc., and this, the infiltration of the entire sector, taking the people out of it. When I personally think we need to see the people back in terms of quality rather than quantity. But the other word, regulatory capital we hear about. I was a regulator, but in the commodities markets with clearing houses, not clearing banks. But risk is risk. And what I've been interested in the work I've been doing for the last 15 years is mutualisation of risk. When I came to Scotland, I introduced the idea of a guarantee society for procurement, which became Scottish Lib Dem policy, but what happened to them, it disappeared with them. We took the concept, we were funded by Innovation Norway, to look at mutual assurance of credit, credit risk, and did some good work, brought the idea to Scottish Enterprise where it died, as a lot of good ideas go to die, I'm afraid, or used to. I'm sure they're vastly improved these days. I do hope so. Anyway, but, it wasn't aimed at you. Now, but I have been doing a lot of work on this, and I do believe that there are lessons to learn from the past. Everything's been done before. Friendly societies have been done. P&I clubs mutually assure 90% of global shipping risk. Nobody's ever heard of them. And the point is that if you do that, you don't need the regulatory capital. If you're providing a service, you just need to be able to cover your costs and your marketing, etc., but you're not taking the risk. And I'm absolutely sure that the future lies, and that's why I've finished me thinking the unthinkable, and we're now looking at doing the undoable. And I think Scotland is perfectly placed by its legal and financial, its creativity, its inherent understanding of solidarity. I think we're perfectly placed to take the lead in the next generation, which is going to emerge a lot quicker than people think, because we have reached an inflection point, I believe, of peak rent. I like that expression, peak rent and peak debt. So we're going to have to do something else. And that means, I think, in this room, we have the people who can actually, I think, imagine that and maybe start the process of acting and making it happen. And I'll stop the speech at that point.
But there'll be opportunity to come back to that this afternoon for absolute sure. Any other? Yep, sorry, Rachel.
Comment, really. I'm trying to make it a question because comment, not a question, is just such an academic thing to do. So I'm going to have a go at a question, because the thing that really struck me from the Leavers colleagues from Leavers Money Skills is, do we have a challenge of intergenerational common bonds? Is that the key challenge that one of the key challenges of the future of credit unions is to find what it is that will form the bond into which the upcoming generation, into which young people can enter. It just really struck me in what you're saying that folk, they don't think about credit unions unless their family are in it, right? So that's the intergenerational, right? The family's part of it. But if you've got mobility, if you've got less sense of place-based community, if you have what Robbie's talking about earlier about the established industries, right? So the sense of a continuity in place that is intergenerationally sustained. If you don't have that, then how do you transfer a sense of common bonds, and how do you make the bond with the next generation so that they enter into the credit? That all sounds pretty airy-fairy, but it sounds like it's quite practical, actually, because, as our friend, as Chris is saying, that, this is coming at us, right? It's not the young people sort of thing out there, right? This is the customers, this is the borrowers and the lenders, right? And if there isn't a way of forming a community of common bonds that includes that generation, then the enterprise fails. So I suppose I'm interested in how credit unions are thinking about that, I suppose, sort of tying together. So it's not education's one piece and the union's the other piece. It's what are the bonds? Where are the spaces in which the generations are meeting and engaging, and how we're thinking about finance being formed in those intergenerational spaces? So that's some.
Does anyone else? Because I've already. No one else?
What an interesting point regarding the generational divide. Not normally appearing in graphs and being, as I say, a student, self-confessed student of statistics. The model which we understand, it's called old or social or traditional. It's been around for 100 years, and it came to these shores via economic migrants back in the 60s and 70s, principally from the Caribbean and Ireland. Credit unions didn't exist then because, in a sense, there was no need or demand for them. But they were established. The indigenous Brits liked the idea, and hundreds were formed, nearly about 900. There's only 230 left. A number of mergers, etc. But on the point of the generations, it's interesting to note that in 2017, there was about 140,000 juvenile accounts, juniors as we know them. It's now down to 78,000. Scotland has lost half of its juniors. England, 38%, Wales 40%. That's quite a reduction. The juniors don't close the accounts. It's their parents or guardians who do so. And the question then is, I think the credit union, as we know it, is failing the adults. They're leaving, and when they leave, they take the juniors with them. So tomorrow's customers are disappearing down the road. And I think it can be recovered, but we can't keep doing the same thing over and over again. There's a quote to Einstein on the wall outside to do with libraries. There was another one, I believe, attributed to the great man. If you keep doing the same thing, you get the same results. And this experiment, if you like, has been repeated for 60 years, and it's diminishing in size. It needs a rethink.
As we hear back from that, we're delighted that the lunch has arrived, because it might be Lent, but we were still hoping for lunch. And it's here. That's great. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, that's good.
This wasn't to offend the Scottish Enterprise right now either, so you're okay. I think one of the things I was keen to explore, and again, it taps slightly into the community wealth building agenda, and I suppose how communities take ownership of assets. So particularly over COVID, they became, I suppose, the linchpin of many communities when you didn't have that access to those national banks or being able to go to larger centres of population. You had to rely on what you had within your kind of area. And fundamentally, there is a question then of how do we ensure that we don't lose the high street or don't lose those, I suppose, linchpins of specific communities in terms of what they can offer, whether it's a shop or a bank or whatever it happens to be. And when we do create opportunities for communities to take ownership of that, what is the role of credit unions, perhaps, of providing the financial backing or, almost matching funding in terms of share issues and things to that effect? So is there an opportunity there for credit unions to actually step into that space and actually get communities to bank with them through that avenue?
Okay, would any of the panellists like to go first in responding? That seems to be a common thread in these questions about developments in the sector and responding to that being on the front foot and how that links to intergenerational developments.
I would say when it comes to one of the questions we ask young people when they fill in a form is who has spoken to you about money? And it's obviously us, but the next one is family. Family is the number one. And obviously they're opening their banks and choosing their finance as a result of families at 14, 15. But then that means come 18, they open up to the world and then they make the choice. And that's presumably where it's not carrying on so much into credit unions. So they're obviously bombarded with choice at that point in time. And they maybe make different choices then, I think.
I was going to say also similarly at that stage, I would say that, I don't have any statistics to back this up. This is just my anecdotal feeling, is that, as you said, maybe even younger, like 11, 14 or whatever, they'll have their, Bank of Scotland account. But then they'll get part-time jobs and they'll get money and they'll be empowered and they'll think, I can book myself a holiday. And then their friend will say, if you get Monzo, you'll get no foreign exchange fees. And it's like organic growth. And there are also a lot of the other things like, say, Revolut or Starling, the digital banks. There are also, and it's all to do with the thing that Robbie was saying about transactional banking, because you can have that all together. Basically, they're bombarded with offers to open an account. You can refer a friend, £5 if you do that. So literally, they will refer everybody that they know. And it doesn't matter if even only like 10% of them take that offer, you still are kind of organically growing yourself. And so I think you're kind of up against that kind of just general kind of mindset is like, oh, that's quite good. And even if they don't engage with that banking system at that particular time, it's still on their app, still on their phone. And eventually you might think, oh, right, okay, what else do they offer me? And you kind of, you grow it naturally in that way.
Yes, I think that's striking a very interesting point and interacts what gentleman Norman is at the back was saying. I think perhaps there's a branding issue here too for credit unions that what is going to attract the younger generation. the Monzos and the Revoluts have got, know exactly what they're doing on that. Not, the credit unions, I suspect, not so much. And but to me, it's raising the wider question of what comes back to this issue of community, and therefore the question of the common bond concept. Robbie was talking earlier about his university financial one. Well, if it's got to the stage where it's as wide and vague as that, then to me that very much raises the question as whether the common bond idea has outlived its usefulness, and whether we do need a reshaping of the essential structures of credit unions, and to take us away from falling over ourselves to try and construct a community where question whether one really exists in any meaningful sense.
No, thank you. Just on that point, yes, so there is a common bond consultation going on as we speak, for exactly this reason, with the 3 million cap. I won't go into the details, but industrial credit unions don't have a cap. It's only if you've got a postcode effectively in your common bond that cap applies, which some see as very two-sided for the sector, but also it's becoming a bit of a barrier for merger activity. The consolidation's happening, but it will abruptly stop because credit unions will reach the 3 million cap, which means that credit unions might fail because they've reached a cap rather than that there's interest to merge with them. But just in the intergenerational thing, I think it is really interesting, and there's no silver bullet here, but I think in relation to like Monzo and etc., I think it's about working alongside them, and you don't have to pick one or the other. And I think we have to realise that we are not going to be able to compete there. So we've got under 3% penetration on average across the UK for credit unions. Now, if word of mouth is your number one way of attracting membership, that's a real problem, a significant problem. And you look at the States and Ireland with like over 60% penetration, it's a very different thing. They just stumble upon a credit union very, very easily. We have to work hard, and I guarantee nobody here has seen a national campaign for a credit union in the UK. I think the closest was Greater Manchester when they did the bus loans. They managed to actually get some posters up on all the bus shelters around Manchester, and it caused a storm because we were like, credit unions on the high street, we could actually see them, but that's really the only time that it's happened. And I guess that's one of the challenges. It's the kind of that cooperation. How do we get the credit union name out there so that they can, work alongside your Monzos, etc.? Because I think something that we do have over the banks is the younger generations have a lot more ethically minded and have got a lot more information when it comes to that. And I think that a lot of them are choosing credit unions for that reason, regardless of our dividend interest rates, etc. And they'll choose a credit union because it's the right thing to do. And I think Monzo kind of tap into that as well. The banks can't tap into that. I mean, we work closely with a co-op bank, but they were probably seen as one of the more ethical, but I don't know I know that's not the case anymore at all. So I think that's an angle we could maybe go, but it's a big how, definitely.
Thank you. Do we have time for another round of questions, Robbie? Yeah?
Thank you very much.
Just to come back on the government question, because one thing that government does do, of course, it creates the conditions for things to happen. It creates a supportive environment in all sorts of ways, sometimes not always obvious ways. At the local level, what it does is it gives businesses seats at tables. It convenes things. Every council has got business advisory groups of some description, and they advise the council on priorities and what should get resources and what should be supported and what groups and programmes and other things should be set up to support these things. So, it has more influence than we sometimes realise. And of course, modern government works through all kinds of channels, often at a distance. It depends on it. So I think one thing that occurs to me, just speaking, is that, for example, the Edinburgh Poverty Commission, which spent 18 months gathering evidence and produced a very powerful report in 2020. It is now conducting a review of what it did 5 years ago. There are going to be a series of debates and roundtables and all sorts of things, and this seems to me the kind of thing that could be inserted into those programmes and find a home in the next round of its work. I mean, I guess it's this sort of thing about seeding in as many places as possible. And some of the seeds might not germinate and others might take root. I like the idea what you said about peak rent and peak, what was the other one? Peak debt, peak rent. I like that. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks. Any others? Robbie. I was particularly interested by Ian's comment about you need the 80 or 90%, which is, if you like, ordinary business. And that allows you effectively to finance the 20%, which isn't. And comparing that with actually what Daniel was saying about the kind of community development credit unions. When it was a previous century when I first got involved with credit unions. Went over to Dublin, had a meeting with the Irish League, and almost immediately the first thing they said was, oh, Britain's not going to work. They're doing poverty credit unions. They never work. And what they were essentially saying was, and this actually comes back with the kind of relationship that credit unions could have with government, which was, oh, we'll give you plenty of money, but only so long as you try and take on the problems that we can't deal with ourselves. So we're talking about very small. I mean, the typical Scottish community credit union has, I think, something like 5 or 6. The average Scottish community credit union has about 5 or 6 million in assets, income of probably 400,000 a year, 4 employees. And they're being asked to take on this enormous task of essentially eradicating poverty, because government can't manage it itself. So I'll get to the question now, which is along the lines of, given what we're hearing at the moment, and particularly I'm hearing about what Lever's Money Skills team's saying, how do we get younger people from non-excluded backgrounds to think, oh, credit, because they're going to be the future, how do we get them to think, oh, credit unions, that's a good idea, I want to be part of it?
Thank you. I will add a related question to what Robbie's just said, which is, I'm interested in this common bond consultation, because to what extent is the common bond an important, attractive part of why people choose to be part of a credit union in the first place? And I'm just thinking about the difference between having a Monzo account because it's easy to use it when you go abroad or transfer money to your friends, and then having substantial savings and choosing to put them somewhere, and whether anyone who's had experience with credit unions thinks that losing the common bond might be an important factor in making it less appealing. But we can start with the other questions.
Just thinking about why a young person maybe would want to join a credit union, exactly as you're saying. I mean, we were talking about this, and I think they would like the idea of a common bond, because I think young people are interested in that idea. They like being part of a community. I also think what you said about ethical finance, they are far more interested in that, I would say. So I think that is definitely something that would draw them into it. The idea of the smaller loans, which might not be so easy. I mean, Monzo's, it's much higher rates, things like that. So, I think that's definitely something. Do you want to?
Well, I was just in terms of the common bond, I was just thinking: is it? I mean, because I don't know a huge amount about credit unions really. Could it be seen as a barrier to participation if you're a young person? Because you might think that actually I don't, unless you have like the information from, your intergenerational thing from your granny telling you this is what you should be doing. If you might think that doesn't, I don't belong to that set of people. I'm just kind of throwing things out there, so I just don't know.
I suppose the other thing is, I think just naturally, if you're a young person, you're looking outward, aren't you? You aren't always looking to remain within a community, or and I'm sure that they're looking to move on, to move to other ways, and that must hinder it. And I would think.
Well, I don't think I've got much to add to what you were saying. I mean, it seems to me that there's a question of credit unions playing to their strengths, that it is the case that I agree many young people are highly suspicious of the mainstream finance industry, are not very much attracted to the banking financial world as is, or engaging with it, and that both the idea of an ethically driven, not-for-profit. It seems to me that's a label that needs to be really promoted. Institution plus one that's community-based. These are all ideas that are very popular with younger people. So it seems to me it's a question of how, for the credit unions, the challenge is to bring themselves into the way that this message reaches the younger generation, which is not something I can say anything helpful about at all, but I'm sure involves TikTok and all kinds of things.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, the common bond one is a really, really interesting one. I think something worth noting is there's two kind of main kind of barriers that credit unions have, which is the common bond 3 million and also the interest. They're capped on the interest they can charge, which is 3%, which works as 42% APR effectively. Now, those caps keep us in our box, for one, but also they, in theory, get us regulated differently to other financial organisations. If we lose those caps, there's an argument that will be made by your building societies that you're banking, well, why aren't we regulated the same way? And at credit unions, most credit unions, not all, but most credit unions, as we are now, wouldn't be able to cope with that. They're already struggling to cope with that. We was talking with our colleagues at Kingdom before about the task that credit union directors have now as volunteer directors ultimately, and the increased regulatory environment. This would push it on significantly. So that's the balancing act. I think you're probably right. The common bond is kind of an old-fashioned selling point to the younger generations. Once you remember for life if you choose to be, so it doesn't matter if you move away, but I don't know if that's immediately clear, and it's quite, when you start having to explain the entire way a credit union works when you're onboarding, you've lost them, because Monzo, they're clicking a button, you know, and that is a problem. But another issue that potentially could be seen, and look, we could ask 30 credit unions and we'd get 25 different opinions on what should happen with a common bond, and we have. But if you were to lose a common bond entirely, because we're actually we're a very small country, it's very likely that in a few years' time you'd only have 3 or 4 credit unions servicing the entire country, because those credit unions are currently set up where they could offer better interest rates than the smaller community ones, higher dividends, interest rebates. They would be able to just take the entire credit union sector. Now, it depends what your viewpoint is on that, because some would say, are we not here for our members? And if members are going to get higher dividends and better interest rates, isn't it better to have less credit unions? But it kind of goes, I think challenges that we have that other sectors don't have, basically, because I think that sort of question needs to be asked, but say in the States, that's not a question that needs to be asked. So it's something that we're going to have, it's one of the reasons this consultation, and any credit unions in the room, it's important to note you can all submit your own consultation response to this, and I would recommend doing so, as well as submitting them to your trade association. I know ACE as well will be doing the same. This discussion here is why it's important for you to do that, basically, because every review has to be taken in.
Thank you. Ian, does Castle Community Bank have TikTok or any way of engaging our members?
I wasn't going to talk about that. I'm just going to talk about something else, which actually is related to, you know, how do we engage with other sectors? One of the big things, and you all know this, is credit unions are terrible about talking and cooperating with each other. They're all like their own wee world, and there's lots of reasons, historical tradition reasons for that. They're like their own wee camp, their own wee geographical location, their own wee workplace, or whatever it is. And you're talking about Monzo, you're talking about other, you know, this stuff. It's called marketing. I know maybe that's a word you've never heard before. It's called they've got huge budgets to get that message out. And very good, you know, and fair enough, so do banks. You know, I worked in banking for many years, and I remember when I was head of marketing for the credit card business for the Royal Bank of Scotland. Now I'm talking, this is what I don't know, almost 30 years ago. I had almost £30 million just to promote credit cards around Scotland. So, you know, we're talking about, you know, serious money. I don't know how much Monzo's spent on their marketing or others, but really this is where, and I know ABCUL and all these other trade bodies, but until credit unions, as I think even Robbie mentioned about, work together, you know, for the common good, which they try to do individually, but together for, whether it's marketing campaigns or whatever it is, I don't think you'll ever be able to compete. You know, we're living in a, you know, you're being naive because you don't have the budget to get out there and get that message out there. Yeah, you can do local stuff, and there's been local stuff in Edinburgh and buses and everything else. I remember with another credit union in Edinburgh did that, and I'm sure other local initiatives. But to get that national awareness, you have to all work together. And I suppose that's where ABCUL and ACE all come into it, because you are the trade bodies. And all the government lobbying and all that's great stuff, and it's good. But it really is ourselves. No one else is going to do it for us unless we do it. And it's something that's the hardest thing, to actually understand that. We have to do that and put our money where our mouth is. We can't expect everyone else to give us a living. Well, there you are. Controversy.
Thank you.
Yeah, something just popped into my mind. I'd like to energise the conversation a little bit, because my background was in energy markets, and I'm doing a huge amount at community energy level. Why not think about things in terms of Common Bond being an energy user group? Every street has an energy user group. Lots of people are trying to put solar panels on roofs. I mean, some people have got more roofs than money, and other people have got more money than roofs, okay? But there isn't yet a mechanism whereby those can be brought together. Okay, so that's one angle. The second one related to this is, I'm sure plenty of people in this room know what the first credit card was. Diners Club. The common bond of a club of restaurants and hospitality, and the common bond of a group of diners, giving them time to pay. No banks involved in that. They came along when further liquidity was needed, when people didn't want to pay off the balance. So one of the things we're looking at literally is how can we complete a triangle where you've got the food coming from the farm so that the people who actually get credit can go to work on the farm, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and literally create local circulation of local value, keeping it at that level. Now, the key point where the credit unions fit in is you need a service of providing the platform, of the discipline of not issuing too many credits, which is what comes into it. It's the whole point about credit as a service. And there's one big thing about this. Banks can't print energy. Banks can't print food. But the service of providing, this in my view is completely possible. It's being done in places around, around the world in one way or another. And I'll just leave with one little anecdote from just before November. Top level conference, God knows why I was there. It was to do with my energy expertise. And I said to these people, have you ever heard of an energy loan? Because they're asking, what could you mutually assure? And they said, no, what's an energy loan? I said, well, you would advance money, pension funds, and you'll get an energy return. You'll be investing directly in future energy. And they said, sounds like a good idea, but it'll take years to do. I said, no, there's £8 billion in the UK already of energy loans. Who? Poor people. They are prepaying, having to prepay, giving an interest-free loan to the utilities, right, and being charged more to do it. Can we not begin by saying, well, actually, guys, this pot of money you're getting shouldn't be an interest-free loan. Maybe it could be some sort of return. Can you see the direction we're going here on this? Literally, none of this takes any law. All it takes is mutual agreement. And I'll stop being radical at that point.
Thank you very much. I think we're coming to the end of the session. Is that right? So, yeah, hugely, hugely interesting. And hopefully that's lots of food for thought for this afternoon. So can we thank our panellists?
Thank you very much, Alicia, and thank you, everybody. Lunch is served on the table at the back. There is plenty of it, so don't be shy about having lunch. And we'll be back in an hour. We've got a couple of sort of thoughts for the day to start the session this afternoon, so we'll stay in this shape. Then we're going to break into groups of around about 4 to begin to unpack some of this and develop some practical outcomes from what we've been talking about this morning, and then we'll come back together. What we'll do is, when we do come back together as a plenary, we'll do a kind of horseshoe shape here, so it'll be a slightly different shape this afternoon. Anyway, enjoy lunch, and once again, thank you to everybody for a really, really stimulating morning.